Part 3. Lower Fire Month, 9th month, 4th day 22:13. Climb ran through the empty corridor. Thanks to the enchantment on his helmet, he could see the two people running with him, despite the invisibility spell on them. He even wondered if the spell had been cast at all. However, upon closer inspection, the two of them looked a little washed out, so there was nothing to fear. He was careful not to make too much noise, but neither could he slow his pace. They had to rescue the kidnapped girl while Sebas bought them time. Even if Sebas was a powerhouse which even Gaze of Stronov and Brain Unglaeus together could not defeat, his opponents were still the members of Six Arms, who were said to be on par with Adam in tight-ranked adventurers. If they surrounded and pounded him, things might get dangerous. Therefore, they had to immediately rescue the imprisoned woman and escape with Sebas. After several more turns and rushing down a staircase, the man at their head suddenly ground to a halt. Climb stumbled in place for a few steps, and then the thief quietly apologized. "Sorry for the sudden halt, leader. This is it. The cells are just beyond this corner, and there's a woman in the innermost one." It was purely by chance, but the invisibility spell wore off as he spoke as though it were keyed to his voice, making them all appear vibrantly colored once more. Heeding the thief's suggestion, Climb peered around the corner. There he saw a dark passageway, with several large cells in a row. "There's nobody around, the same way it was when I came here just now. There were no captives, or even sentries." This lack of precautions was terribly suspicious. It was as though someone was trying to lure them in. However, when one thought about it calmly, nobody would be suicidal enough to infiltrate a building where the strongest members of Eight Fingers Six Arms were gathered. Climb and the others would not have taken that risk either, if not for the fact that Sebas was serving as a decoy and the other woman was locked up here. The others probably thought the same way too. This casual attitude and the openings they had left were a great boon to Climb's team. This was what people called pride going before a fall. "Then let's move in quickly and rescue the hostage." Perhaps it was because they were on deadly ground together, but the thief's tone had become a lot friendlier than just now. Brain asked him, "Before that, can I ask a question? What's with those double doors all the way inside?" Looking down the corridor, there was a set of double doors, just as Brain had said. "Ah well, given what I've seen until now, these aren't jail cells lined up here, but animal cages. I think the doors in there lead to a place where the beasts can be led into something like an arena." "I see. Indeed, I can smell beasts from those cells. I heard that in the Empire, they allow magical beasts to fight in their arenas." Climb sniffed at the air like Brain did. There was the odor of animals, carnivorous beasts, to be precise. However, there's a difference between taking them for training or using them for public executions. I don't really want to think about what other things you could use them for, but I guess they might have put on a monster exhibition or something. Look at how far I've drifted from the topic. Shall we? Climb nodded to Brain's question, as did the thief. The thief led the way, followed by Climb and Brain. The three of them reached the innermost cell without encountering anything, and then the thief began inspecting the cell door. The magic activated, and there was the sound of the cell door lock disengaging. The thief looked unhappy, but there was no time. All Climb could hope for was that he would not mind a small thing like this. "Is that Sewer-san?" Climb called out to the woman in the cell. The woman lying on the floor propped herself up. Her description was an exact match for the one Sebas had provided, and she was dressed in a maid's uniform. They probably had the right person, given that she had probably been wearing the same thing when she had been kidnapped. That calmed Climb down greatly. Their first objective had been achieved. Next was their second objective of getting her safely out of here. "Sebas-sama asked us to rescue you. Please, follow me." The woman Sewer nodded as Climb spoke to her. As Sewer emerged from the cell, she looked at Brain and then the thief. She looked a little surprised. In particular, her eyes lingered longest on Brain. There's no noise from behind this door, the one which might lead to an arena. Still, it's too risky to enter a place we don't know anything about. We ought to stick to the plan and retrace our steps. Climb and Brain approved. Or rather, they were both warriors, and they knew this sort of decision was best left to a professional, hence their ready agreement. Climb looked down at Suer's feet and made sure that she was wearing shoes. That way, she ought to be able to run. Then, let's get out of here before the enemy arrives. Right, I got it. I'll let in you follow, like just now. However, there's no invisibility magic this time round. I'll be advancing while keeping an eye open, so don't miss my signals. Got it. What's the matter, Brain-sama? Climb asked Brain, who had been studying Suer intently. Oh, no, it's nothing, Climb-kun. Brain wrinkled his brow, but said nothing else. Climb glanced at Suer, but did not see anything which particularly drew his attention. She looked like nothing more than an imprisoned maid. There's nothing, right? Then, shall we? The thief began running, followed by Climb and Brain. Suer was at the rear. After running past the cells, the thief slowed down before he turned the corner. He was probably checking out the situation around the corner. However, someone turned the corner, as naturally and casually as though they were taking a stroll, standing in front of the thief. The man had been prepared for someone to get in their way, but he was still hard-pressed to react when it actually happened. Just as Climb froze in place from the sudden development, the thief made use of the reflexes a former Orichalcum ranker ought to have. He readied his dagger and stepped forward with murderous intent. And then there was a tremendous crash as the thief flew back, as though a bull had knocked him away. Fortunately, Climb caught him. Given that the thief could not brace himself, he might have been badly hurt just from hitting the ground in this state. However, although Climb caught him, he could not fully absorb the impact, and the two of them rolled to the ground. Climb was worried about the thief's groan as he tried to fight back the pain, but he was more concerned about the man who had appeared before them. That was because he was most definitely an enemy. The person who stood in their way was a bald man. His body bulged with muscles, his face looked like a boulder, and he was covered in animal tattoos. The man's name flashed through Climb's brain, and his surprise took physical form as a sound. 0. This man was one of the 6 arms, and the leader of their security division, the mightiest being in 8 fingers. Indeed, kid. You're that whore's slave, aren't you? HMPH. To think there'd be ants crawling in here. Just leave a bit of bait out and you're everywhere. It pisses me off. 0 spared only a glance for Climb and the thief on the ground before turning his stern gaze onto Brain. He sized the man up from head to toe, evaluating the worth of Brain the warrior. Climb was grateful that this mighty person had not bothered to take him seriously, and then he checked on the thief. Are you alright? Do you have some way to heal yourself? He asked quietly for fear Zero's attention would turn on them. There was no answer, just the sound of unimaginable pain. The shocking thing was that there was a fist-shaped dent in his breastplate. It clearly illustrated the power of a single punch from Zero. After shaking his head several times, the thief finally came to his senses. Climb did as the thief asked and felt around his waist. I've seen your face before. You're Brain Unglaze, aren't you? The man who fought on par with Gaze of Stronov. Your name's not for show. None of your movements expose any weaknesses. By the looks of that, you must have been training yourself after that tournament. Now I understand. Succulent didn't lose because he was careless, but because he faced you head on. He lost because his foe was too strong. I have to forgive his failure just this once. Alright, you made me lose face, so normally I'd have to kill you. However, I'm a generous man. On account of your peerless sword skills, I'll give you a chance. Kneel before me and swear to be my subordinate, and I'll spare your life. You won't stinge on the money, will you? Oh, are you interested? Why not hear you out? I did beat Succulent, so I should be able to look forward to good treatment, no? Ha, your desires do run deep. You're talking money before begging me for your life. You can't take it with you, you know. Oh yeah, what the hell? You mean you can't pay? I didn't expect you lot to be that poor. Or are you pocketing all the money yourself? The hell you say? Zero's knuckles cracked with tension. You've got a mouth on you, Unglaeus. A lot of people talk better than they fight. Are you one of them? Or did you get cocky because you beat Succulent? Then here's a sincere apology for making you so full of yourself despite only beating the weakest member of Six Arms. Brain shrugged, as though he was only kidding. He had been trying to draw the conversation out because he was thinking of the wounded thief and Climb. In that case, why had Zero played along with Brain? He was probably confident of beating them 3-on-1. Or was there some other reason? Sewer had slowly shifted behind Brain. If she wanted to be protected, then she should have hidden behind Climb for safety's sake. There was no need to savor the thrill of danger by moving behind the man staring down Zero. Brain worked his shoulders and glanced behind himself. It was a very subtle movement, and Climb was not certain of it. However, his gaze had been directed at Sewer, and there was no goodwill in his eyes. No, that was most certainly the way in which he would look upon an enemy. Why move there? Was he looking at me? No, that's not it. Something had happened. Climb rose uneasily to his feet. HMPH, so the ant stood up. Bought enough time for him, haven't you? It's about time to tell me what you really think. No, there's no need to speak. Kneel, or don't kneel. Show me, Unglaeus. Brain snorted. This was enough. Then die. He extended his left hand straight out and pulled his right hand back, clenching his fist as he did so. He lowered his waist straight down, but his body was rigid and unmoving. The way his muscles bulged almost made one think that they were creaking. At this moment, Zero was easy to describe. He was like a massive boulder, or no, perhaps it would be better to say he was like a raging bull. In contrast, Brain lowered his stance as well. His movements were the same as Zero's, but there was a world of difference between the two of them. If Zero was like the roaring rivers, then Brain was like a gentle brook. If Zero was the attacker, then Brain was the defender. I ordered them not to kill the old man, but the ones greeting him are a bunch of hotheads. They might go too far by accident and end his life. That would be troublesome. I have to kill the old man personally, in order to let everyone know how stupid it is to oppose us. His face twisted wickedly. It was as though to demonstrate how hatred could make a person ugly. Unglaeus, I will make you the foundation of my reputation as the strongest warrior. I'll use your tombstone to show everyone the fate of anyone stupid enough to challenge Six Arms. As for the horse slave, I'll pretty his head up and mail it back to her. A wave of bloodlust washed over them from the front. However, it was nothing compared to what they had experienced from Sebas back then. Climb's eyes sharpened and he stared back, leaving Zero a little disappointed. Really now? I understand. Then, I shall be your opponent, Zero. Climb-kun, I'll leave the enemy behind to you. Climb did not understand what he had said for a moment. But it was only Climb who did not understand. The thief hurled a throwing knife at Sewer. The flying blade which the former Orichalcum-ranked adventurer threw was swift and sharp. Sewer barely managed to evade it. According to Sebas, Sewer should have been an ordinary maid. This was far too skilled for it to be a mere coincidence. So you already saw through it. The speaker was still Sewer, but the voice belonged to the illusion devil, Succulent. So you didn't ask your rescuers anything because you thought they'd recognize your voice. Still, circling around behind my back was too suspicious. Well, I've been guessing that you were either the real person under mind control, or someone transformed into her shape. Brain did not look back, still staring down Zero as he unraveled the mystery. After that, I took a guess from the way you ran, but I couldn't be sure until the end. Fortunately, it really was you. It's not like I could tell him to throw carefully and only graze you. The thief's face hardened for a moment. Then, he seemed to be directing an expression of gratitude at Succulent. HMPH. Based on what he's saying, he saw straight through that little charade you suggested. That being the case, there's no need to rely on it. What comes next will be decided with pure strength. Succulent, kill those two mooks behind you. You can do that, right? Of course, boss. Sewer melted away into nothingness, and in her place stood Succulent. However, he was still in the maid's outfit. When I think about it, I went out of my way to get you out. If you can't even do a small thing like this, what Zero would do after that was so abundantly clear that the man hurriedly nodded, and then he turned to glare at Climb. We meet again, kid. His words were stiff, laced with a tension that he, as the previous victor, should not have. Eight Fingers was not a compassionate organization, and naturally, they would not forgive a second failure. Succulent was now fighting an uphill battle, and the composure fled from his face. Eight Fingers can bail out someone imprisoned in the princess's name? Though he had witnessed the power of Eight Fingers, he nevertheless raised his sword. I can't lose this time round. Brain had helped him defeat his opponent last time. However, not even Brain Unglaeus could guarantee an easy win against Zero and Succulent, who were both members of Six Arms. My enemy is stronger than me. If he clung to that cowardly line of thought, all he could do was await death. I must win. With this unshakable determination in his heart, Climb pushed his foot forward. He slid it forward and advanced a step toward Succulent. It's okay, I'll help you too. The thief voiced his encouragement from behind. His casual tone was probably a kindness on his part, calculated to ease the tension in Climb's heart. Since he was more skilled than Climb, it was good to be able to count on his support. However, he had taken a blow from Zero, and he was not fully recovered even after drinking his potion. In addition, they had never fought side by side before, making Climb worry that they would not be coordinated. The thief sensed what Climb was thinking, and Climb in turn sensed him smiling thinly. Don't worry. I'm just here to support you. Thieves fight differently from warriors. I'll show you that we don't just clash swords. Thank you. He was more experienced than himself. Therefore, it was not that Climb should match himself to his partner, but that the thief would match himself to Climb. All Climb had to do was fight Succulent with all his strength. Climb stared at his opponent, a determined look in his eyes. Succulent was generating clones of himself like he had last time. Now there were several Succulents, and he could not tell which was the original. A bitter taste spread through his mouth. Just as both sides closed in on each other, a bag flew out from behind Climb's back. This is how a thief fights. The bag burst at Succulent's feet, and powder burst out. Succulent covered his mouth, thinking that it was poison. But that was not the case. It was not poison, but a magic item. Will-o-wisp powder. The effects were immediately visible. Of the 5 Succulents, only one glowed with a murky bluish-white light. Succulent's eyes went wide as he realized this. Will-o-wisp powder was used to reveal invisible opponents or those who were skilled at stealth. It was also ineffective against the unliving. Multiple vision reflected the condition of the original, so even if one threw ink at the original and got it dirty, the illusory doubles would all get dirty as well. Unless applied with great skill, it was still very difficult to tell apart the original. However, when it came to magic items, changes in the original did not affect the illusions. Perhaps a high-level illusion spell might have been able to replicate the effects of a magic item. But Succulent, who had studied as a fencer and an illusionist at the same time, could not use such high-level illusions. Climb's sword hacked down at the real Succulent. Damn it. Succulent leapt away. It was a splendid dodge, but seemed a little unsightly owing to the fact that he was in the maid's uniform. They went back and forth like this over a dozen times. Climb had the advantage. This was not a ploy by Succulent. It was simply due to the difference in their combat prowess. Humans could not suddenly become more skilled in the space of a single day. The difference in their respective combat abilities had not changed since their previous encounter. However, there were exceptions to all things. Simply put, Climb had become stronger while Succulent had become weaker. To begin with, Climb was equipped with his enchanted armor, his shield, his sword, and other pieces of his gear. His muscular strength had improved, his defensive power had increased, and the most important thing was that he could use the fighting method he was familiar with. In contrast, Succulent had been arrested. All his equipped magic items had been confiscated, and on top of that, he was forced to dress in a cumbersome maid's uniform in order to disguise himself with an illusory transformation. Their equipment had shrunk the gap between them, but naturally, that was not all. One reason why Succulent had become weaker was because his fighting style had been seen through. In addition, the thief supporting Climb from behind was providing him with timely and accurate advice. Even when Succulent used illusions, they were countered one by one through the thief's alchemical or magical items. The way the thief had responded to Succulent was as though he had specially prepared to face him. In fact, the thief had estimated the abilities of 6 arms from prior information and prepared countermeasures against all of them. The startling thing was that he even had countermeasures for Succulent, who should have been in jail. This was an obsessive degree of preparedness. Son of a bitch. Succulent's voice was more worried and panicked than he had been before the battle. He glared at the thief. Climb moved to block his line of sight. He could not allow him to be attacked. Defended by a frontliner, the thief deliberately aggravated Succulent. "Oi, why the fierce face? Aren't you one of the 6 arms who are supposed to be on par with adamantite-ranked adventurers? What's wrong with a little handicap?" Succulent's face twisted in hatred. The wounds he had taken in their exchange of blows wept fresh blood, making him look even more vicious. "Shit!" Succulent cursed, and prepared to cast a spell. As a warrior, Climb should have rushed up to stop him, but he did not. This was because he had executed over a dozen tandem maneuvers with the thief, and they had developed an unspoken understanding with each other. Therefore, he decided to trust the thief. A bottle flew out from behind Climb in a parabola and it shattered at Succulent's feet. Climb saw a colored, asphyxiating gas spread out from it. Cough, cough, cough. Succulent coughed several times, clearly in misery. This was merely petty interference with an alchemical item. However, it was quite effective, and Succulent ceased his spellcasting. Trickery like this would have had no impeding effect on a specialized magic caster, but Succulent had trained as a warrior as well as a magic caster. Thus, even this trivial hindrance had interrupted him, wasting his mana. Climb charged forward with all his strength at the distracted Succulent. This was not the same measured strike in their exchange of blows until now, but an advance that did not allow for retreat. Some people might have felt that this was a rash action, taken in the hope of gaining a speedy victory. However, Climb's warrior instincts were screaming at him. This was the moment of truth, when victory and defeat would be decided. Indeed, Climb and the thief currently had the upper hand, but there was no telling how long their superior circumstances would last. The thief's supply of thrown items was not inexhaustible either. He ought to make the best of this favorable moment and press the advantage. Climb activated the unique martial art he had mastered yesterday. This move did not have a name. If he had to pick one on short notice, he might call it Limit Break or Mind. Its effect was simple enough. It released the human brain's limitations on the human body. Through this, all his attributes from his senses to his physical abilities reached the next level. Extended usage of this technique would lead to physical strain or muscle tearing, so it could be considered a double-edged sword. However, he would not be able to beat Succulent if he did not end the battle as quickly as possible. As the martial art activated, Climb sensed something switching on in his brain. The raging emotions racing throughout his heart were vented in the form of a ferocious cry. Succulent looked shocked, as though he had recalled something. Accompanying the surprise was something which might have been called fear. This was not a feeling which he, a man who was on par with an adamantite-ranked adventurer, ought to have when facing his lessers. Climb brought his sword into a high stance and brought it down in a mighty chop, and it was blocked. Being able to block a magic longsword with an unenchanted dagger was truly worthy of praise. However, the fact that Climb's blow could force Succulent the Fencer to select a defense he was not skilled with was also quite admirable. But that was not the end of the attack. Climb immediately thrust his foot forward in a kick. Succulent immediately made to protect his abdomen, and his face contorted severely. Abba! His face was pale, his cold sweat flowed like a river, and he was practically hunched over as he backed up in a bow-legged gait. Climb glanced back and saw the thief wincing in sympathy. Succulent had been kicked in the groin by an iron boot. While he had apparently been wearing a cup of some sort, Climb could still feel something soft deforming inside it. And then, he finished him off with a cleaving strike to the head. Fresh blood spurted forth, and Succulent collapsed heavily to the ground with a thump. Climb did not dare let himself get careless, and so he surveyed his surroundings. WuxaWorldAudio.com. He was particularly watchful in case an enemy tried to circle around behind him to where the thief was. After a while, he finally allowed himself to be certain. That was probably not an illusion. This was a great accomplishment. Even if it had been 2-on-1, it was a significant victory. Climb turned to Brain. For a moment, he thought that he might be able to help, but then that enthusiasm vanished. Their battle was on a completely different level. The first thing was that it sounded different. What was supposed to be a clash between blade and fist produced the echoing of crashing metal all around. There was no pause either. The intense exchange between them made Climb wonder if either of them had time to breathe. Zero, in particular, caught his attention. His fist scooped a trench out of the wall. It was a smooth, flowing movement, like digging through clay, and it gouged a scar into the wall's surface. Oi oi. They say first-rate monks can make their fists as hard as steel, but that guy's fists aren't just that. Are they as hard as Mithril? No, or Calcum? The thief was watching the same scene from beside Climb, and he murmured to himself. After a minute's worth of exchange blows, after an intense battle which would have seen Climb lose his life if he were in there, both sides were unharmed. As a result, a look of genuine respect bloomed on Zero's face. Unglaeus, you're pretty good. You're the first man who's endured my attacks for this long. Similarly, Brain had a respectful expression on his own face. Same to you. This is the second time I've met such a skilled monk in my entire life. Oh, Zero's face twisted in interest. To think there's another monk with skills like mine. That's the first time I've ever heard of something like that. Tell me his name. I won't be able to ask you when you're dead. He ought to be heading here once he's done taking care of your 6 arms. Zero's eyebrows wrinkled, and he smiled. HMPH. You mean that old man? Sorry, but I sent 4 of my people to welcome him. They're not like Succulent over there. They might not be as good as me, but they're not bad either. How could that old man make it? You think so? I'd find it easier to picture him strolling leisurely around that corner. Well, that's pretty scary. In that case, I'd best get a little serious. Climb was dumbfounded by those words. The fact that Zero still counted that intense back and forth as taking it easy made Climb imagine just how unattainable he would be if he fought in earnest. The fact that Brain did not seem surprised at all also shocked him. Could it be neither of them were fighting seriously? This is the true pinnacle of mankind, a battle between people on par with adamantite-ranked adventurers. Let's do it, then. Those two have wrapped things up on their side, so I don't need to draw this out anymore. Fall to me here and let's have an end to it. Zero. Brain sheathed his sword and lowered his stance. Climb had seen that posture before. It was the same stance Brain had assumed when he had taken down Succulent in one hit. Before Climb could wonder if Zero would be similarly defeated in one strike as well, the man had already leapt well back. He opened up the distance between them with superhuman agility. Edstrom can deploy a sword barrier. Your move isn't exactly the same, but it's also a barrier of blades. No. Enter casually and you'll be cut in half, am I right? Zero had probably not seen through Brain's self-innovated martial art, but he had still sensed the nature of the move, proving his warrior's senses were exceptional indeed. Still, from what I can tell, that move of yours only allows you to respond to your opponent, and you can't use it if you don't take a stance. Zero punched the air. It seemed to be a meaningless move, but that iron fist actually generated a shockwave which buffeted Brain's body. So all I need to do is attack you from a distance, and I win. Or do you have some way to cut a distant foe? No, I don't, Brain answered honestly. If you're going to fight like that, then I won't use this move. Zero calmly, with an expression that some might say did not suit him, one that brimmed with motion like the surface of a lake, asked Brain. Brain Unglaeus, is this your ace in the hole? Indeed. This trump card of mine has only ever been defeated once, from the front. How boring. So someone else already defeated it once. Then this will be the second time. Zero slowly pulled his fist back, taking a stance of his own. I will punch straight through you from the front. I'll shatter that move you're so proud of and attain victory. First I'll defeat Brain Unglaeus, and then someday I will have Gaze of Stronov kneel at my feet. That way, I'll be the strongest man in the kingdom. And instead your ambition's going to falter at the first step of facing me. Zero, you really do have too much time on your hands, don't you? You really are all talk. No, you put up quite a fight. I can't say that talking's all you know. That said, I'm still better than you. Go to hell knowing this, and regret the fact that you dared stand against the almighty Zero-sama. Here I come. Zero's body was covered in animal tattoos, and those tattoos began to glow faintly. Brain, on his part, remained still. While Zero appeared to be as still as a statue, Climb could sense a tremendous power accumulating inside him, longing for the right moment to be unleashed. None could interfere with this violent clash of strength against strength. And then suddenly, a nonchalant voice cut in. So you gentlemen were here after all. Everyone turned to look at the unexpected arrival, as though they had received an electric shock. Even Zero and Brain, who should not have turned their eyes away from the powerful foes before them, did the same thing. There they saw an old man, Sebas. To Zero, he should not have been here. What's this? The Six Arms should be dealing with you now. Did you sneak in like these people? Sebas gently shook his head. No. I defeated your colleagues and then I came here. Nonsense, utter nonsense, enough of your bullshit. They might not be a match for me, but they're still warriors whom I gifted with the title of Six Arms. How could you have made it here unscathed? As the saying goes, truth is stranger than fiction. Sebas-sama, the sewer-san over here is a fake. Succulent took her form with an illusion. You need to go rescue her. Ah. Thank you for your concern. However, it is fine, Climb-kun. I have already rescued her. She was elsewhere in this building. Sebas turned to look behind him. Climb followed his line of sight and saw a girl wrapped in a blanket at the room's entrance. Ah! Climb hurriedly looked down at Succulent. The maid uniform he wore was soaked in blood and there was a huge rip in it. He could not possibly take it off and give it to Suer, and she would surely refuse it too. Pay it no heed, Climb-kun. The maid uniform is merely a cloth outfit. There is nothing to regret. Sebas smiled bitterly as he spoke, and Climb relaxed a little. Oh yeah, you're actually ignoring me for idle chit-chat. You lot are pretty relaxed, aren't you? Zero had been facing Brain since just now, and so he could not move carelessly. Now, he finally changed his position and glared hatefully at Sebas. Old man, I'll ask you again, what happened to my people? I killed them all. His tone was as casual as though he were picking a wildflower by the road, but his words were merciless beyond compare. It can't be. How do you expect me to believe that? Zero's furious cry only drew a smile from Sebas. All that benign smile did was make Zero's instincts realize that Sebes was telling the truth. Brain Unglaeus, I'll fight you later. I'm going to show this man the power of 6 arms. Got it. Try not to die right away. Still, I don't think there'll be anything left for me to do. Bullshit. Old man. You'll pay with your life for that nonsense you spouted. Sebes smiled bitterly. That smile was unbearable for a man who prided himself as the strongest warrior. Zero's tattoos glowed. Head of the security division, leader of the 6 arms. Battle demon, Zero. Even mighty warriors like Gaze of Strahnoff or Brain Unglaeus would instantly lose to him in unarmed combat. The outcome would still be in doubt even if they had weapons in hand. One of this man's careers was a vocation called shaman. That vocation had a skill which allowed one to be possessed by animal spirits, through which he could gain those animals' excellent physical attributes. It could only be used a limited number of times in a day, but once used, it would allow a human to boost his physical abilities into the realm of wild beasts. A physically superior animal using the fighting arts of a human being, surely nothing was more frightening than that. Zero activated his skill. Normally, he would conserve his strength by only activating the power of one animal at a time. However, Zero understood that Sebes' strength could not be underestimated. That said, he did not believe that Sebes could kill 4 of the 6 arms by himself. However, if you had broken through in a direct assault instead of sneaking in, that meant that there were others besides him, which made more sense. It was more likely that he had been accompanied by Blue Rose. Before he had more detailed information, all he could do was use his full strength to defeat Sebes and then fight Brain Unglaeus some other day. He had to show the people around him his overwhelming power as a threat before temporarily retreating. He decided that this was the best way to do things, and he began preparing his most powerful move. The leopard on his feet, the falcon on his back, the rhino on his arms, the bull on his chest, the lion on his head. He activated all of them. He felt an explosive power gush out throughout his body, and it felt as though his entire body had swelled up. For a moment he was even afraid that he would burst. Yeaarrrtt. He expelled the burning power from inside him and stepped forward. This was the attack of Zero, the mightiest warrior of 6 arms. It was a straight punch with just a fist. There were no feints or fancy moves here. It was just a simple punch with an iron fist. However, the power within that fist beggared belief. In addition to his shamanic skills, it was also enhanced by numerous other skills from monk-type jobs and then by many magic items which granted his fist overwhelming speed and destructive power. It was so fast that even Zero had a hard time controlling it. It barely qualified as a technique because it relied on stepping into the opponent's reach and slugging them with all the strength he could muster. However, Zero was not at all hesitant about letting his opponent see his ultimate move. This technique was simple and invincible. He had the utmost confidence that nobody could defeat it with petty trickery. Zero's heart cleared as he cast everything else behind him. His senses seemed to slowly distend, and he stepped forward, feeling as though his body was stretching out behind him. Ah! Someone shouted. It was too late. Zero reached Sebes in the blink of an eye. The power within him moved perfectly, fully accumulated and focused, and he threw a powerful straight punch with his right fist. Zero saw Sebes frozen in place, probably because he had been too fast for the old man, and smiled. It was as though to say, "Go and regret making an enemy of me, the strongest warrior of 6 arms." Hoo! The fist connected with Sebes' vulnerable belly. It was a perfect, immaculate strike. Explosive power rampaged like a violent gale, and Sebes flew lightly through the air like a doll, into the distance. His corpse hit the ground, but even that could not dissipate the power of the strike, and the body continued rolling violently across the ground. He did not move. He had died on the spot. No, that was only to be expected. One could imagine how all his internal organs had been ruptured into a sticky paste. He only looked human on the outside. This was Zero's most powerful technique. It was a fiendish move which incarnated the principle of the one-hit kill. At least, that was how it should have been. Instead, Sebas did not move at all. He blocked the punch which Zero had thrown with all his might head on, using nothing but his belly, his own muscles. Nobody who saw it dared to believe it. One could say the scene before them was unreal. The difference between their bodies was obvious at a glance. However, the outcome had been completely the opposite of what was expected. The person who could least believe it was naturally Zero himself. This was the most powerful blow he could make. He could not believe any living being could take it and remain unharmed. That was how it had always been until now. That was what he had always thought until now, but then the scene had unfolded before his eyes. Thus, he did not react even as a black object flashed before his eyes. Sebas raised his leg to the air. The foot raced past the tip of Zero's nose like the motion of a flying swallow. And like a thunderbolt, it fell. An axe kick. That was the typical name for a move like this. However, its speed and power were anything but typical. "Who are you?" Zero muttered, and the corner of Sebas' mouth curled up slightly. A gruesome sound of cracking filled the air. Zero fell to the ground, his skull pulverized and his neck and spine shattered, as though he had been crushed by a several hundred-kilogram weight. The room was silent. In a word, everyone in this room was transfixed. Sebas shifted away from where Zero's smashed skull was gushing fresh blood and patted at the place where Zero's fist had struck. Phew, that was close. If not for your timely warning, I would probably be dead. Are you kidding me? What warning are you talking about? The three people present, perhaps even Sewer, thought the same way as well, did not speak, but they shouted the same thing inside their hearts. You saved me, Climb-kun. Wah, yes. Climb's mouth was still wide open as if to go. But he nervously accepted Sebas' thanks. His mind had been so overloaded that he had no idea what to say. It seems I was just a little bit stronger than him. Sebas indicated a small distance between his two fingers. The gap between them was probably the difference between Zero and himself, which Sebas was implying, but naturally, nobody agreed with that assessment. How could that be a little bit? Just like before, everyone present thought the same thing. In any case, since we've rescued her, I think it might be best to retreat now. No, are the other members of Six Arms? Really? Yes. I killed them all. There were too many of them and they were all expert fighters, so I could not go easy on them. I somewhat regret that now. Is that so? Well, there's nothing to be done about that. Please don't beat yourself up about it. The three of them simultaneously looked at the corpse of Zero on the ground. None of them could bring themselves to say, "You're lying." In any case, let's get the troops to search this building. They had originally come to search this building. Going Sebas' help and being able to make a clean sweep of an important enemy stronghold was a miraculous stroke of luck. In addition, if Sebas' words were to be believed and they looked to be 100% truthful, they had even achieved the amazing result of destroying the strongest fighting force of 8 fingers. One could say they had done better than any other group. The only imperfection was that Zero, a man who knew a lot about the organization, had been killed, but that was merely a calculated loss since they could not have taken him alive anyway. Only a fool would be unhappy with that. As they heard Climb's excited words, approving looks appeared on the face of Brain and the thief, and they nodded. However, one person seemed unhappy. "What's wrong, Sebas-sama?" It is nothing. Just that something caught my attention. Let's not talk about it right now. The air here is not good. Shall we head outside? Indeed. Everyone took turns looking at Zero's corpse and then Sewer before expressing their approval of Sebas' suggestion. Sebas walked up to where Sewer was standing at the entrance and scooped her up. Her pale, slender, almost fleshless legs dangled in the air. They saw how tightly Sewer clung to Sebas' clothing with her emaciated arms. A butler and a maid. The mood between them did not seem like that was all there was to it. It would be boorish to ask about their relationship. Does it matter what's going on between them? Right, let's go, then. After saying so, Climb led everyone out without waiting for them to reply. The other three followed behind him. They could conduct their investigations after Sebas and Suer left, and he remained alert. If someone ambushed them along the way, he intended to fight on behalf of Sebas, whose arms were occupied with Suer, although there might not be a need for that at all. However, his worries were unfounded. They had sensed people within the building on their way in, but now it felt like it had been abandoned. When one thought calmly about it, once Sebas defeated the Six Arms, there was no way anyone would be brave enough to remain in the building and fight him. In all likelihood, they had probably fled. If that were the case, hopefully the people waiting outside could arrest them. Climb pondered those thoughts as he left the building. That sense of liberation took a great weight off his shoulders. Someone tapped Climb's relaxed shoulders. Looking back, he saw that it was the thief. The man's eyes were fixed in a completely different direction. The wide-eyed look on his face was much like the one he had when Sebas had slain Zero. Climb followed his line of sight, and then his own eyes went wide. A wall of fire? Climb unconsciously nodded as he heard Brain mutter to himself. Flames would rise up if a house caught fire. Climb would definitely not be shocked by such a blaze. However, that was not what he was looking at. It was a wall of fire over 30 meters tall, encircling a district of the royal capital. It looked to be hundreds of meters long. Now what could that be? Sebas' surprised yet relaxed comment brought the three of them back to their senses. What should we do, leader? I think that's the warehouse district. Who's in charge of that? Blue Rose's leader, Alvain-sama. I'm judging this as an emergency, so we'll abandon all our objectives and fall back to the royal palace as directed. After that, I'll be counting on you all for advice on how to proceed. That's probably the best course of action. Sebas-sama. I will take her to a safe place to prevent something like this from happening again. Understood, Sebas-sama. Thank you for your help yesterday and today. Please pay it no heed. We shared the same objectives, so all I did was render a bit of assistance. I shall strive to repay you all for your attempt at rescuing her. Now, if you'll excuse me, I will be taking my leave. End chapter.